Welcome everyone to the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley, where we share stories about education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. I am Andrew Ta, president of this eClub. You might notice that we are unable to see my face due to technical difficulties, but our speaker for this week still has a great program for us. Louis Hahn is primarily responsible for developing deal flow for the Arcview Group's investor network. He gained his investment experience from working with high net worth foreign nationals in private equity and debt financing in commercial real estate transactions. The cannabis industry became his passion after founding, operating, and exiting a tax-paying medical cannabis collective that reached over 300 patients in the San Francisco area in just 1 year. A longtime advocate for local and international communities in need, Louis had a privilege of arguing a deportation case pro bono in front of the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, receiving multiple awards for pro bono service within the Silicon Valley community, teaching ESL to underprivileged youth in South Korea, and community leadership with Rotary International. He received his law degree from Santa Clara University with a focus on corporate law and immigration. He received his BA from the University of California, Davis. Without further ado, here is Louis Hahn.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Andrew. Great introduction there. Hello, Rotary eClub. It's an honor and a privilege to be in front of you all today. As you may have heard, I have a bit of history with Rotary, starting with the Interact Club in high school, and then working with Andrew on the Rotary Club at UC Davis as well. So I'm glad to be in front of you today to talk about a different topic, and that's about my work in entrepreneurship and raising capital in the cannabis industry. Give me a moment to pull up my deck here. Great. All right. So here. All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started here? So as Andrew mentioned and introduced me, my name is Louis, and I'm the Director of Deal Flow here at the Arcview Group. My primary role is to work with all the companies who are trying to raise capital in the cannabis industry. And my goal here today is to hopefully educate you on what exactly the cannabis industry is, why you should care about it, as well as the types of companies and people that are coming through into the industry. Hopefully you'll be quite surprised about some of the profiles of the folks coming through and getting involved in the industry. But also just some quick tips about what my observances are and my perspective is on raising capital in cannabis. So the first thing I wanted to start off with is to hopefully pull at your heartstrings a little bit and just establish why should we care about cannabis. You know, when people first hear about weed, cannabis, marijuana, whatever name you want to call it, they might be still beholden to some of the older cultural perceptions, the Cheech and Chong kind of look of it at all. But actually there's so many different layers that go into this industry that rose out of a movement. You know, I'll explain each of these three pictures below. You may have heard several years ago about the medicinal benefits of cannabis. Medical cannabis is one of the first conversations a state has before legalizing recreational or adult use cannabis. Highlighted by this fact that CNN's doctor, their neurosurgeon, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, totally changed his opinion 180 when he discovered the medicinal benefits of CBD in particular. And having just personal experiences, observing how CBD could help children with epileptic seizures and other disorders that traditional medicine simply couldn't solve. So it's a powerful source in not just serious illnesses like that, but even with athletes with pain relief. There's a lot of conversation about the cannabis policy in the NFL, for example, and how that could be a better alternative than some of the opiates or other painkillers that they're taking for their sports-related injuries. All the way to our soldiers overseas. That's this picture highlighted on the left here. The choice that a soldier needs to make, a veteran needs to make when they come back and they're suffering from ailments like PTSD or for physical related injuries from their service abroad. It's a choice between these prescription painkillers, and some of you may have heard about the opiate overdose epidemic right now. The choice and the choice between painkillers like that to more natural medicines like cannabis. And it's been proven to be really effective, not in a traditional mainstream pharmaceutical sense, but just through so many anecdotes, stories from veterans who have turned to cannabis instead of prescription painkillers. And then, of course, there's the social justice aspect as well. There have been many communities, particularly communities of color, who have been particularly affected by the war on drugs at large, not just with cannabis. It's often poorer, lower income communities of color that were affected by the war on drugs in the first place. And you could even trace that back to even Chinese communities around the Opium War. And that's early involvement in the 1900s. But now as this movement evolves into an industry, there's it's a smart move to sort of bring this out from the underground and create a more regulated, stable environment for folks to find their cannabis and to find their medicine. And so there's that social justice and medicinal layer to it. But if not your heartstrings, maybe your purse strings will convince you. You may have heard in the news just very recently, just last week, that Canada became the second nation in the world to legalize cannabis. The first is not America, actually, despite all the news that you may hear. It's a very state-by-state patchwork. A very state-by-state patchwork here in the United States. But as you can see in this map on the bottom right-hand corner, here for us Americans, that there's the majority of the United States has flipped over into at least allowing for a medical cannabis. Over 30 states have allowed for that. 9 states have gone recreational, and in tandem have a medical states as well. Only 4 states here have no legislation on the books whatsoever. So they're still following the federal framework for how to deal with cannabis, which is essentially just calling it illegal. So politically speaking, there's a lot of momentum both at home and abroad for creating a new cannabis industry. And also there's a lot of economic opportunity as well. Here's a chart that sort of outlines what cannabis sales have looked like in both the adult use market or the recreational market, that's the green bar here, as well as medical sales that have grown and are predicted to grow over the next several years. By comparison, I wanted to draw a parallel with a market that we might be more familiar with, the craft beer market. A lot of folks like to draw parallels with the cannabis industry and other high value crops such as hops. So I just wanted to point out this number here, overall beer market of over $100 billion. And that just to show that there's still a lot of room to grow. Cannabis has been a conversation in some sort of legalized fashion, at least since the late 90s. And still, despite 20 years of history, there's still a lot more momentum if you do draw a parallel between the craft beer market and the cannabis market. So there's a lot of economic opportunity to be had here as well. So what is the cannabis industry? It's not just cultivators, dispensaries, and extract manufacturers, but as this chart highlights here, there's so much that goes into it. Everything from a marketplace and e-commerce platforms. You may have seen, if you live around here in the Bay Area, billboards for Ease in particular, or Meta, or any of these sort of like delivery service platforms. Weedmaps also too is starting to get into the marketplace game, all the way to compliance and tracking. There's a phrase used in the industry called seed to sale. Once a state properly gets its regulations in order and creates a framework, they want to track cannabis from the moment it's planted as a seed all the way until it gets sold to you at a dispensary. It's called seed to sale tracking. And that has created a lot of opportunity for both tech and legally minded folks, entrepreneurs, to create compliance software to track the seed to sale life cycle of a cannabis product, all the way to payment platforms, data and analytics, social media networks, and of course the actual direct operators themselves, everything from biotech to extraction and manufacturing. And then the investors themselves. Arcview isn't the only place, although we were perhaps one of the first, if not the first, source of capital for the industry. having been founded in 2010. But there's a lot of hedge funds, private equity funds, family offices that are getting involved and helping support the entrepreneurs and also create economic opportunities for the investors as well. So it's a very broad industry. It's not just the growing of it or the selling of it, but there's so many different pieces to it that there's a lot of opportunity to get involved if you are thinking about getting into it as an entrepreneur, even if you don't have a green thumb yourself. But that's not to say that the industry, I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture. It does come with its own issues, particularly here in the United States. That's where I want to focus the conversation here. As I highlighted in that one map, it's a very patchwork system here in the United States when it comes to the cannabis industry. It all trickles down from this Schedule 1 status, which is why it's here listed at the top. Schedule 1 means it's, well, just to back up a little bit, there is a scheduling system or a ranking system that the federal government has around every sort of medicine or drug that we take. Everything from cannabis all the way to over-the-counter painkillers that you may get just from your CVS or pharmacy. And at the very top of the list is what's called Schedule 1, a category of compounds and substances that the government has deemed to be highly addictive and has no medicinal value. Despite that, states have gone ahead and pushed forward positive legislation on both the medicinal and the adult use front, saying that these laws don't make sense anymore since they were initially passed. But although the states are pushing forward this legislation, the federal government still is taking the adamant stance, which is changing. There's some positive movement in Congress, but there's still officially the stance is that cannabis has no medicinal value, has no place in our society. But given this conflict between state and federal frameworks, and the fact that there is this burgeoning new industry, a lot of issues have risen up. Everything from taxes, which is what 280E alludes to. 280E is a specific provision in the IRS tax code that says that if you run a quote-unquote illegal business, you still have to pay your taxes, actually, but you can't take standard business deductions like every other business in America can. You can't deduct the printer paper in your office. You can't deduct travel expenses for when you go meet with the client. Any of these standard business deductions, you can't write off. You can only write off what are called cost of goods sold, which means that at the end of the day, particularly plant-touching businesses have to write a bigger check to Uncle Sam than any other business in America, which has a huge impact on the bottom line. There's also the state-by-state regulations as well. There are a lot of these brands, if you've ever purchased a cannabis product, there might be some brands that you're familiar with. You may not be able to find that brand in places like Colorado just because of how disparately and how differently the regulations were enacted. And so it's really difficult for a company to build a business model when state A says you have to do it this way, and state B says, no, you have to do it a completely different other way. And not only that, there's product inconsistency in terms of quality as well. You can't legally transport cannabis across state lines because of this patchwork framework, which means that they have to grow their own product in their own state, manufacture it all right there in that state, and you may get a different medicinal benefit or experience if you, even if it's from the same company or if it's got the same label on it, as well as banking issues as well. Because of the federal stance against cannabis officially at this moment in time, a lot of the big banks like the Wells Fargos and the Banks of America, et cetera, are unwilling to take cannabis money. And also why you see a lot of dispensaries around here who are cash only or require you to go to an ATM to pull out cash, which creates all sorts of issues from a public safety concern just to a pure logistical management concern. You have people carrying bags and bags of cash, dispensaries and cultivators, and taking these bags of cash to the tax office in Sacramento in order to pay their yearly taxes. And so that just creates a host of concerns there. And so there are definite issues. That's not to say that there aren't solutions for these issues. A lot of creative, innovative companies are finding ways to navigate through these issues, but there are some that we're actively trying to address. All right, but these issues, that's what entrepreneurs try to do, is to solve these issues, and that's where a lot of opportunity is created. And to fuel this opportunity, part of it is driven by investment capital. And you might be surprised about how much capital is flowing into the cannabis industry. I pulled out this headline from entrepreneur.com that was published earlier this year. And I believe this was published, in March, where investment in the cannabis industry has grown 600% so far, totaling about $1.23 billion in just the first 5 weeks of 2018. So there's a lot of movement from private investors, funding sources, more traditional funding sources to pursue this opportunity in cannabis as well. But how do you go about it? Maybe some of you on this call or listening in have raised capital before, and I would love to field some of your questions or insights after. But just from my own personal experience, having seen thousands of deals, hundreds of pitch decks and conversations with entrepreneurs from all over the space, I could essentially boil it down into 3 different categories or buckets, and as depicted by these pictures. One is the team, one is the traction, and the third are the terms. So let's go into each of these in turn and see what exactly resonates with investors, at least with our network. So the first thing that we'll talk about is the team. Regardless of whether, in my experience, regardless of whether you're a number crunching kind of entrepreneur, or if you're an impact investor, it's more about the impact that it's going to have on the community or the environment around you. Everyone agrees that you bet on the jockey and not the horse. And so what I've pulled here are 2 real bios of entrepreneurs that did fairly well through our investor network. I've, of course, redacted some of the more identifying pieces of information, but I'll just pause on this slide for a few seconds to give you a moment to read through some the bio here. All right. And of course, you're welcome to pause this presentation and continue to review this at your leisure. But as you can see, the entrepreneurs there, they have a lot of experience in the field that they want to participate in, whether it's they're serial cannabis entrepreneurs themselves, having built, sold, and exited multiple cannabis companies specifically, or they have gained experience in a separate field, such as in bio number 2, where this individual received a PhD in engineering from MIT, was involved in the renewable energy space, and then is now leveraging those skills and that experience into creating a sustainable solution for the cannabis industry. So it's not just learning how to grow, or it's not just familiarity with the products itself. You could bring all sorts of experiences and the skills that you've built up so far, and can leverage that into creating an opportunity and a business in the cannabis space. And so that's the team. Our investors are particularly impressed by folks who have this kind of well-rounded experience. I have to emphasize well-rounded. Someone who's experienced in cannabis, experienced in the vertical they participate in, and maybe has been an entrepreneur once or twice, at least in their experience already. That gives investors a lot of confidence that you know what to do and how to do it. But let's talk about traction as well. Traction is a very broad term that I'll use, and traction can be defined in a lot of different ways. And at least here at the Arcview Investor Network, what's resonated more recently is companies that are already operational and have hit the ground running. It's still very early, but there are a lot of companies that are that have been at this for 5 or 10 years, have gone through the initial motions of creating a business, and are now ready to launch a new product line, to enter a new territory, or otherwise expand their business. So if they're in that sort of growth phase and already have revenue on the books, then that's a clear indicator to an investor that this team knows what to do and how to do it. But even if you're pre-revenue, even if you're just getting off the ground, there are other indicators of traction that an investor may find promising. One of them is to find traction within the round itself. In other words, let's say you're raising $1 million, 500,000 of that has already been filled, and now you're just looking for the other half. That gives an investor a confidence because there's already clout there, there's already credibility there. by virtue of the fact that there are already investors involved. Maybe it's product R&D, that you've already built out the platform, the product, the device, whatever it is, the service, and you've gone out and validated that through your own experience, through beta tests, or through case studies and clinical trials. But you have the product or service completely built out already, and you've gone out and tested that with the market. That goes to the bottom line here. At the end of the day, having a clear plan and having a clear idea is great. But what's even better is proving that your idea works by virtue of the fact that people are paying you for your device or your product or service revenue. By convincing investors in the beginning that there's already capital raised, that you've gone out and to the community and gotten feedback and have gone through all the iterations and have it ready to go. All these indicators of traction shows that you're first of all serious about your idea and your business, but that there is demand for it as well. Last thing I'll talk about, which may not be everyone's favorite topic, but the kinds of terms that we see in the cannabis industry as well. Nothing too crazy. If you've been in the startup or VC space before or in those circles, these are terms that you might find familiar. Convertible notes in particular, which is essentially a debt instrument that converts into equity upon successful milestones achieved. That's very popular with pre-revenue early stage startups or for companies that are looking for a bridge round. We do see priced rounds here as well, particularly for companies who are in that growth phase or are already operational, cash flow positive businesses, and just makes sense for both sides of the table to have an equity transaction there. And we do see some debt financing as well, particularly around some regulatory frameworks where some states may not allow out-of-state investors, for example, to have an equity stake in a piece of the pie in a cannabis company. And so one way to still fuel those companies, but also have a positive return on that investment is through debt instruments or loans as well. So nothing too crazy in terms of the mechanisms through which companies get funded. There are some nuances, yes, but just wanted to throw this out there to show that it isn't anything too different than what you see in like the VC funded tech world, for example. All right, but that concludes my presentation here. I know it was a lot of information to take, but I'm glad this was recorded so you can peruse and review the information at your leisure. And I also want to thank everyone for this opportunity as well, and to the eClub and to Andrew for providing me this opportunity. I would love to field any questions or elaborate on any thoughts here.
Yeah, thank you, Louis. That was some really great information about a newly developing market. What's different about raising capital for a cannabis-based business versus any other?
What's different? So even though I said that the mechanisms of the funding vehicles themselves, the convertible notes, equity, and loans, are fairly straightforward, there are some differences still. Some of them, one of them is convincing entrepreneurs about the cannabis industry in the first place. A presentation like this might be something that an entrepreneur will have to do in order to justify the opportunity in the cannabis industry in the first place. You'd be surprised at the number of traditional investors, bigwigs, things like that, who think, oh no, cannabis, the last time I had an interaction with that was when I smoked cannabis in the 70s in high school. That was a real conversation that I had with an investor just the other week. And so people aren't just simply aware. You don't have to do that with tech. You don't have to do that with craft beer. You don't have to do that with any of these other emerging industries to justify the opportunity. And so there's that piece of it as well. The other thing that's unique about the industry here is that there is a social impact component to it as well. There is, as I opened up this presentation with, by bringing to light this new industry, it has a positive impact on underage drug use, for example, on the number of opiate addictions, on the number of DUIs when people turn to cannabis instead. as well as the communities, disadvantaged communities that are affected, people of color, lower income communities, and veteran populations and medical populations as well. So there is this strong social justice component to it, and to highlight that, you may want to look up, just several articles that have been around in news recently that highlights the attentiveness of the industry around this issue, in parallel to the economic opportunity as well.
Okay, and for the social impact end, have you heard of any pro bono community service endeavors centered around cannabis?
Pro bono community service endeavors. Yes, there's quite a few. There's always service providers that are looking to help out communities in need, individual consultants or firms as well. There are accelerators as well. I know, not sure if their services are pro bono, but there are services that are specifically targeted to disadvantaged communities. There's one in Oakland's backyard, actually, called the Hood Incubator. This was started by an Ivy League graduate who went through business school there and wanted to come back to Oakland, where their hometown is, and start this incubator or accelerator specifically for people in that community to get involved into the cannabis industry. So they help you with your business planning and pitching to investors and all these things. And there's also, there's a multitude of organizations that you could also just become a part of, like the Minority Cannabis Business Association as well. So there are lots.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so for cannabis or any other industry, what are some key questions a first-time entrepreneur should be able to answer about their product before they start fundraising or speaking to potential investors, other than showing proof of traction?
Right, of course. Right, so one of the first things that an entrepreneur should be aware of is their competitive positioning in the marketplace. I see so many deals, and there's always a unique angle around each of them. But the question becomes, how unique is it, and if that's going to matter to the consumer and the other stakeholders involved. I often also encounter entrepreneurs saying, no, we don't have any competition, that our idea is so unique and so new that this will disrupt the whole industry. I would argue that even pen and paper and Excel is a competitor to the latest and greatest software platform. So there is competition, and it would behoove the entrepreneur to do their due diligence, do their research, see how their solution compares to the others, and how not only will it surpass the competition, but how will they defend against the competition? What's called, your competitive advantage and your defensive moat, and articulating that to the investor. Whether that's in the form of patents, a top-notch team, an exclusivity agreement. You need to think about how you're going to defend against the bigger sharks in the water. Otherwise, they may simply look at what you do and copy what you're doing. And so thinking about your competitive positioning in the marketplace is an important part of that investor conversation.
Okay. Oh, cool. Well, that's actually all the questions I have. Louis, thank you so much for taking the time to record this program with us. Members, please remember to sign in. Members and guests, please leave any questions you have for Louis or any comments about the program in the discus below. We'll have Louis have the final words. Louis, do you have anything to send us off with?
Great. Just a few words. Thank you so much again, Andrew, for the opportunity, and the Rotary eClub here as well, for providing a forum for me to articulate some new things, hopefully some new things about the cannabis industry. I'll just end with this statement that I hope that I've convinced some of you or I've informed some of you that you could do well by doing good. Just like you can do in Rotary. That's what motivated me to join Interact and Rotaract and in my younger years. And it's that ethos and that philosophy that's drawing me to the cannabis industry. So I hope I've also informed you otherwise, and I'm happy to take your questions as well. about the industry. Thank you so much for your time.
Beautiful. Thank you, and have a good week.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everybody.